Currently we are in section 4 and we are about to check out the fourth video of this section. So in this section we will learn how to perform asynchronous programming in Flutter by using the Future API, async, await and then function as well. Now I have already covered these topics in my Dart fundamental tutorial, so make sure you check them out. You can find the link in the description. So let us now talk about these concepts in context of a Flutter application. But before that, I would like to talk about what happens in case of Android application, how to perform asynchronous programming in an Android application, and how Flutter is different from a native Android application. So for that, let us assume we open our application. Now whenever we open an Android application, one default process is created. Now attached to this process, we have a default main UI thread. Well, this main UI thread, let us assume, is represented with the help of this blue arrow. Now whenever you interact with the application, you do it with the help of main UI thread. And within the main UI thread, we perform small operations, such as the user interaction, such as click of the button, checking the checkbox, or some animations. Then we can perform some button click, some mathematical operations, and even our logical operation persist within our main UI thread. Now if you notice, all of these operations requires a very small amount of time. And remember, in our main UI thread, you always have to perform tasks that requires smaller amount of time. Now in Android, if you want to perform some heavy operation such as downloading or uploading of a file, so in that case, parallel to main thread, you can create a separate worker or background thread. And in this thread, you can perform the heavy operation such as network operations, downloading of a file, loading image from the server, and also you can perform heavy database queries. Now since Android is multi-threaded, so you can have two threads running parallel to each other. Now what about Dart? Well, Dart is single-threaded, so is the Flutter. So in Flutter, you cannot have two threads running parallel to each other. That is, you can only have the main UI thread, but in Dart or Flutter, you cannot have a separate worker or background thread. Now you might ask, what about these long and heavy operations such as downloading of a file or playing the music in the background? How to deal with this situation? Now in Flutter, all of these long operations are done using the main thread itself. And also you might ask, if you perform these long operations in the main UI thread, then your application might crash or freeze, resulting in the poor user experience. Because performing long operation in the main UI thread freezes the UI, or you can say hangs your application, which might result in blocking of your UI and thus crashing your application. Now the question arises, how to perform the asynchronous programming in case of Flutter. So for that, in Flutter we have these APIs such as Future, Async and Await. Now using these, you can actually perform these heavy operation in the main UI thread itself, but without blocking the UI in a very tricky way. I will just show you a very simple example of how to use Future, Await and Async keywords. Now whenever you run any application, whether in Dart or in Flutter, our application runs in the main UI thread, which means all the functions that are declared here, such as main function, print file content, and also download a file, will run in the main UI thread. Now this function of download a file will be used to download a file from the server. So within this function, I will simply write a dummy long running operation. Well, this code is actually our dummy long operation, which will take 6 seconds to return this file content as a string value, my secret file content. Well, this statement will return a future object of the type of string. Now what exactly I mean by future string? Well, this statement will basically return a string value as a file content after 6 seconds. Well, eventually it is returning a string value, so that is why I have declared here as future of string. In simple words, you can think of this statement like this. In future, we will get a string value. So what happens is that this operation takes 6 seconds, such as first second, second second, and so on. After 6 seconds, it will return a string value. Now before our timer starts, that is our operation starts, it simply returns a future object. Now this future object after 6 seconds, that is when the operation completes, automatically gets converted into the string value. Fine. So it is basically a promise token that hey, after 6 seconds, I will give you a perfect string value. But right now when the operation starts, it simply says just take a promise token as a future object. Fine. So here I will just return the result and also modify my return type, which will be the future of t, that is string in our case. Now also note that suppose in future the return statement simply returns an integer value such as 23, so in that case you have to put here as int. Similarly, if it is a boolean, then put here as boolean. Fine, as simple as that. Now let us call this function from our print file content, because only after we download the file we can print the file content, and then write the print statement. Now here the compiler is not happy. It says that the value of type future string can't be assigned to the variable of type string, which means that when we call this function, what happens is that we are basically performing a long running operation in the main UI thread. And as a result, this future object at the time when the operation begins simply returns a promise token, right? It does not immediately return the string value. So here as well, we have to put here as future string. Fine. Now let us call this function from our main function. Now before this, let me write a print statement for better understanding. Main program starts and then main program ends. Well, these two statements will help you to know how our program is getting executed in the main UI thread. And also, in order to use the future API, you have to import the Dart async package. Run the application. So there we go, our program started, then our program ended. Now in between, if you notice, the content of the file is instance of the future string. That is, at this point of time when the program started, we did not have result. We just had a valid future object which we are getting here and then printing it here. But we are actually getting the result after 6 seconds, right? Which means that when the program ended, then only we would have got the result. So how to get the result? So for that we need to use the await and async keyword. So right now within the print file content, when we are calling download a file, so in that case we can use the await keyword. And in order to use the await keyword within a function, you have to use the async keyword as well, right after the function name and also before the curly bracket, like this. Perfect. So once you do it, it simply means that hey, unless you get a valid string result, which we are expecting our 6 second, do not execute this statement. Fine. Earlier what was happening is that without the await keyword, this function was actually returning just a future object, which we were immediately printing it out here. Now once we declare the await keyword, then it will only execute the code further, that is this statement, only if we have got the valid result from this function. So here on the left, since we are getting the valid result, so here we can remove the future, because we are eventually getting the file content as string value. Now run the application and let's see what happens. So here our program starts and also ended. Now after 6 seconds you will notice we have got our statement printed. The content of the file is my secret file content. Perfect. So this means that unless this operation gets over, or we are actually awaiting the result here and waiting for the operation to be completed, then only we are moving on to the next statement. Fine, like this. So this is the beauty of using await and async keyword. So in this way we executed all the code in the main UI thread. And also we did not even block the UI. That is, our program started and also perfectly ended. And since this statement actually took about 6 seconds to complete, that is, it is a long running operation, so in the runtime, so it was performed in the end. That is, when the rest of the code is executed, then only this operation was completed. Perfect here. Now async and await keywords were included in Dart version 1.9. So before that we had only one API to perform the asynchronous programming, that is future. And in future class we have a special function of then function. So let us see how we can do the same thing without using async and await keyword, just by using future API with then function. So here let us remove the await keyword and also the async keyword. And now we have to change it to future. And after the statement, since we have to be assured that this file content should actually print out this statement, so in that case what we can do, we can wrap this statement within the then function. So I will use the file content, which is our future object, dot then function. And here if you notice, we have to pass in a lambda expression or a function. Let us put here as result string. And then within the function, we can cut the statement and paste it here. So this whole statement is actually comparable to the previous code that we wrote using async and await keyword. This simply means that execute this statement only if you have got the valid string result here, right? That is, when we got the result here, then only execute this statement, the code that we have written here. And here I think I have to change it to result string, which we are receiving as a parameter within this function. Now run the application and see the changes yourself. So our program started and ended smoothly without blocking the UI. And in the end we have got our statement printed. The file content, my secret file content. Perfect. So in two ways you can perform the asynchronous programming in Flutter and Dart. Now that we have built our foundation in phase 1, let us jump into the phase 2 from the next video onwards and start implementing our SQLite database in Flutter. See you there.